and we talked about your relationship with Vince McMahon. There's some rumors that he might actually open another wrestling company with Shane, start something off with Shane to eventually take over. I know you have a history of working with Shane, particularly when there was some talk of the McMahons buying Pride. Could you
Oh yeah,
share that
yeah.
story?
Yeah, sure. If I would love to see what Vince and Shane are going to do if they're truly going to do this. I've always this might be skirting the bound of political correctness, but I've always liked both guys. I have my ups and downs with Vince over the years. I think anybody closely connected to him would probably say the same thing. But at the end of the day, he's been good to me. I like the guy. I like Shane. They're easy to talk to. I don't pass judgment on what he's accused of, other to say if it's true, it's awful and horrific. Um, but I want to believe that it's not. I don't have a comment on whether it is or not. But all in all, good dude, good to me. And obviously, I don't need to talk about how smart or successful he is because the world knows that. Um, with Shane, younger version of Vince, a little happier go lucky than Vince is, I think. Huge mixed martial arts fan, Shane, massive fan. And I got a call. I'm not good at years, Devin, but I want to say 2007 maybe, and I could be off by a year, maybe even two. And it was John Laurinaitis, who was the head of talent relations at that time, saying, "Hey Rick, you always want to try to do the Johnny Ace voice whenever we talk about John, right? Can you do the Johnny Ace voice, Hannibal?"
No, I can't. But if anyone could, it should be you with all the contacts you had with him over the years.
I can't do impressions to save my life. He'd like, "Hey
Oh, do
Rick."
you? I gotta ask you, do you have, and I don't mean to digress, but do you have the same view about Johnny Ace and his accusations as Vince?
Nothing. I don't know anything about it. You know what? I know what I read in Meltzer's and Alvarez's sheet, and that's it. Nothing more. So
All right, thank
uh,
you, Rick. I appreciate it.
that was good. Way better than I could do. So so Johnny called me one day and says, "Hey Rick, Vince is seriously thinking about getting into the MMA business." Now, the reason they called me Hannibal is, it's a different era. Pro wrestling and MMA definitely had its, fair share of crossover activity in Japan, but it had not crossed over to the USA really at all yet, other than Ken Shamrock fighting at UFC. But people even then did not know Ken had a pro wrestling background in Japan. And Eric Bischoff might dispute this, and Eric is a friend, so this is not an argument or debate or a challenge, but I was very much the bridge, more so than anybody else in the early days, between pro wrestling and mixed martial arts. And what I mean by that is, it's obviously fairly high profile in pro wrestling with my school and my promotion and, the documentaries and whatnot with my company, UPW. And I started a company in 99. First of all, opened a gym called Extreme University, which was the first open to the public mixed martial arts gym in California. And the reason I emphasize open to the public is obviously Lions Den, Ken Shamrock's preceded mine. But I had a school for mixed martial arts, but we put a pro wrestling ring in the school, and that's where we started the first Ultimate University for the UPW promotion. Now, in starting this, I ended up very quickly managing some of the top heavyweights in UFC at that time, namely Mark Coleman, first heavyweight champion ever, Mark Kerr, who is being played by The Rock in the upcoming movie Smashing Machine, Tank Abbott, Ola Taktarov, Marco Hua, Stan Severin, Don Fry, Chemo, a lot of the early era icons. And I was well known for that within pro wrestling circles. And I was also traveling to Japan a lot with guys like Butterbean, or who I'd booked to fight at Pride, fight at K1, crossed over Sylvester Turkai and Tom Howard and Sean O'Hare and Nathan Jones to bring them there to fight. So a long precursor to say this. Johnny calls me and says, "Rick, Vince is thinking of getting into MMA. We'd like to fly you out to Stanford to spend a couple of days with us with all the company leadership across like every division to talk about helping us to formulate a plan to get into the business." Like, great. So turned out being a pretty good gig. They flew me once a month. They paid me a pretty nice fee each time I went. they'd fly me first. That's how they take care of you. Pick you up at the car in the airport, check you in a nice hotel, send the car to bring you to Titan Towers, which was called back in those days. And I spent almost a year, one time a month, architecting a business plan for WWF to get into the business and compete against UFC, which they positively, in my opinion, could have done at that time. Um, it came up somewhere during the process. Shane sat in, if not all the meetings, and he may have at least most of them, and was as much a contributor to it as I was, and very, very smart about how mixed martial arts works. That Shane had a different philosophy than Vince and I had. And I'm curious to get your opinion on this, and anybody's opinion who wants to comment. Shane was a purist. Shane was all about who the best fighter and what the best fights were. And you would think that's almost like duh, logically, right? But you got to think what was working in mixed martial arts at that time. Who were the guys that stood out? Well, there are guys like Kimo, the guys like Tank Abbott, characters, guys that really looked the part. Who had already mentioned, like Mark Coleman and Ken Shamrock, guys also like Gary Goodridge and Brian Johnston, and on and on. And to me, and to Vince, mixed martial arts at that point, if it was going to work in the U.S., would have been more about the characters. And my argument was, guys, and I'm sorry, let me back up. Shane wanted to buy Pride. This has been publicized a bunch of times. Pride was for sale at that point. Nobuhiko Sakakibara was the owner of, or the figurehead or primary shareholder in Pride. Was a friend of mine then, is a friend of mine now. He's back with Ryzen these days. And I bridged the gap to start discussions between Pride and WWF because Pride indeed was for sale at that time. It was like right at the beginning of the big Yakuza scandal over there, where it broke that the sport was pretty much run by organized crime and business was starting to decline largely because the networks were pulling out and sponsors were pulling out. Company was for sale. It wasn't terribly expensive, but I said to Shane one day, I go, why would you buy it? Why do you want to buy Pride as opposed to just start our own fresh? He goes, well, two reasons. He goes, the library, which I thought was valid. There's some great fights. Not that the world really knew who these guys were, just the hardcore fans. And again, Devin, mixed martial arts was very, very niche at that point. It was not in the vernacular. There was not one single fighter, even a Hoist Gracie, that more than one person on the streets would have heard of back in those days. There was certainly no Ronda Rousey or Conor McGregor or anything of that sort, or John Jones. Uh, so it's this tiny sport, and the awareness of it were for people that were hardcore fans. So Shane says the library. Okay, got that. There's some value there. And he goes, in the fighters. We want the fighters. And I said, who? And he goes, well, we want Fedor, of course. And we want Dignog, Daguerre. He goes, we want Krokop. I go, okay, Krokop. I could see you know Mirko Krokop, right, Devin?
Yeah, he looks kind of like Lance Storm.
Yeah, but probably a bigger, more jacked up, better looking version, I would dare
Yeah.
say. So, Crow Cop to me could have been a WWF guy, WWE guy, had he done that kind of training. He had that look, he carried himself like that. And I'm like, Shane, I go, I think it's a mistake. So Fedor, and I love Fedor. Boy, I admire Fedor. I mean, he might be the best heavyweight of all time. That's another debate for another time. Um, I'm like, dude, he doesn't. No one knows who Fedor is. He's like, what do you mean no one knows? He's the best heavyweight in the world. I go, I know, but the people that know that are the hardcores that follow it. I go, here's what happens. If you assume Fedor's contract, you're paying. First of all, there's Krokop. Yes, great look at the time, and that's not even one of his better photos. Um, guy like Fedor, and again, only props for him. And this is not meant for me to be political or sound like I'm trying to take care of both sides. The best ever, but he had no look. Matter of fact, he had like almost an anti look. I always joked about he looked like someone slightly overweight accountant. I always called Fedor that. And that was a time when he could dominate and beat anybody in the world. But A, he would have been expensive. B, in my mind, he was not marketable to the U.S. audience. And C, it's going to quickly show there's a handful of fighters in the world who are really good, and then lots of handfuls who aren't. So I go, let's try an experiment. So I brought two photos to the office. I brought an 8 by 10 of Fedor and an 8 by 10 of Maverick von Haug. Do you know Maverick, Hannibal?
I do not know.
You look him up, Maverick. von Haug, known as the Soul Collector, and he was a guy that was fighting in the underground shows in LA, which was a real thing. Back before UFC ever did a show way before UFC did a show in California, and the guy built a bit of a street legend for himself. Did a lot of cool things throughout the years, but never like broke into the mainstream in any meaningful way. But Maverick looks like, I mean, if you find a photo and post it for the show, you'll see what I mean. He looks like he walked out of the pages of a supervillain comic or the cover of a supervillain comic. And I took these 8x10s. I said, Shane, let's go talk to your dad, or Vince. You always say Vince. But don't
Is
say
this
anything.
him here?
Yeah, that's Maverick. Yeah. That's
That's
not a
good.
good photo of him either. He's very, very theatrical guy.
He looks straight out of jail. He looks straight out of the prison yard.
Yeah, but he's actually a good looking guy. He's super smart and articulate and just a great character. Like knows how to wear a suit, everything you want for like your top guy, one of your top guys. So we brought 8x10s into Vince's office of Fedor and of Maverick, set them down side by side on the desk, and I said, Vince, which one of these guys do you want for the new MMA company? And you know who he said, of course, right? Come on.
Maverick.
Of
Maverick.
course. Of course.
Yeah.
There was zero hesitation. None. He didn't know he
Yeah.
wasn't not a fan of MMA, so he didn't know Fedor. Again, most
Right.
people in the world at that point didn't. And I'm
And
like,
a lot of them still don't, to be honest with you. If you're like, you ask your normal person on the street, they still don't. Is this Maverick here?
that is also Maverick, yes.
Yeah.
But you're still not finding like the super like comic book hero
No.
photos of him, but that's okay. Anyway, the point was, hey, Fedor right now is going to cost you, 100 grand plus for a fight, which at that time was a lot of money. Maverick's going to be 5 grand at that point. And Maverick, you're going to be able to match with thousands of different guys and have good fights. You can't do that with Fedor. I go, we should build this company around guys like Maverick. And who cares if they're, and I'm not saying this about Maverick either, he's a really close friend of mine, but let's say, as opposed to A plus level, let's call them B level fighters. I go, let's get 1,000 guys like this that are all at that level because the audience still is not discerning enough to know the difference. And that's how we build our promotion. And Vince goes, absolutely. So that's why the Pride deal went away.
Very interesting. Well, you said you think it might be a good idea for that to happen. I mean, we've heard that to avoid this happening, TKO might put Vince in charge of the boxing division or
Mm.
give him some good job in the Saudi Arabia Boxing Commission. But from your knowledge of Vince, do you think it's out of the question? He's too old. He just is going to fade away into the limelight, into the obscurity. Like, or do you
You
think
know,
there might be a bit of fire left in him? Like, I'm not going out like this, and I want to leave something to Shane because I hear Stephanie and Shane, it's not always roses.
that last, the first photo you put up of me and Vince together, that was less than 2 years ago. That was at headquarters in Stamford. And he was, to my estimation, as sharp as ever. We were in that meeting with Brad Bloom and Nick Kahn and Kevin Dunn and a couple of others, and Vince ran the whole thing. And the guy's as spot on as ever. And unless something has radically changed between now and then, it I couldn't think of one good reason why he couldn't sit at the top of a boxing promotion that's going to be the top boxing promotion in the world. Absolutely, why not? Again, if he gets past this case, and I would love to see it. I mean, I wish nothing but well to Vince and the woman. I think her name is Janelle Grant. Um, but I hope they both can get this solved amicably and wipe the slate as clean as possible. And I'm not, again, if assuming that the accusations are not accurate.